The first time Owen Garrison rode through Calico Creek, he did not so much as slow his horse to read the painted sign at the edge of town, and that fact alone would come to haunt him in ways he could not have predicted, could not have prepared for, and would spend the better part of 3 years trying to outrun. It was the spring of 1878 when he first passed through, the road cutting through the valley like a brown scar between walls of red mesa. He was riding a big roan stallion he called Delegate, a horse with a temper and a stride that ate up miles like they owed him something. Owen was 24 years old, lean and rope-burned and carrying a set of saddlebags that held everything he owned in the world, which amounted to a change of shirts, a dog-eared Bible he never opened, a photograph of his mother taken in Richmond before the war, and approximately $11 in coin. He was riding west from a cattle drive that had ended badly outside of Abilene, not violently badly, just the grinding, ordinary kind of badly where a man ends up without his wages and without his dignity, and with a long, empty road stretching out ahead of him that seems to mock him for the dreaming that put him there in the first place. Calico Creek was a small town in the New Mexico Territory, pressed into the valley between 2 ridges of juniper and scrub oak, the kind of place that had sprung up around a trading post and then expanded outward in the way that small ambitions do. A little general store here, a livery there, a saloon that doubled as a hotel on its upper floor, and a church that doubled as a schoolroom on Sunday mornings. There were maybe 300 souls in the surrounding area when you counted the ranches and the homesteads scattered out across the valley floor. It had a water tower and a rail siding that the railroad company had promised would eventually connect to the main line, though the people of Calico Creek had been hearing that promise for 6 years and had long since stopped counting on it. Owen did not know any of this when he passed through the first time. He saw it from the road the way a man sees a painting he has no intention of buying. He noted the geometry of it, the rooftops and the water tower and the church steeple catching the afternoon sun, and then he looked back at the road ahead of him and kept riding. He had it in his mind to reach Santa Fe before the weather turned, and there was nothing about Calico Creek that called out to him with any particular urgency. The second year, in the spring of 1879, he came back through on a different route, having spent the intervening months working a horse ranch outside of Taos. He was riding south toward a job offer that had come through a letter sent to him care of the Taos post office, a ranching outfit in the lower territory that needed a man who could break horses and read trail signs. He was 25 now, a little broader in the shoulders, with a jaw that had developed a permanent shadow and eyes that had taken on the particular quality that long years of outdoor living give a man, a kind of distant steadiness, as though he were always gauging the weather somewhere on the horizon. He passed through Calico Creek again in the early afternoon of a Tuesday in April. A dog barked at Delegate from the edge of a fence post. A woman hanging laundry in a side yard turned to watch him go. He tipped his hat out of habit, not breaking his pace, and was out the other side of town in less than 5 minutes. He did not stop. He did not know why he would. The third time was the following spring, 1880, and by then Owen Garrison had developed something of a circuit, a loose triangle of roads through the territory that took him from ranch work to cattle drives to occasional scouting jobs for survey parties. And Calico Creek happened to sit on the most direct route between 2 of the points on that triangle. He was 26 now, and the rootlessness that had felt like freedom at 22 was beginning to wear at him the way a saddle wears at a horse that does not fit it quite right, not painful enough to stop, but present enough that he noticed it at the end of every long day. He would lie in his bedroll at night watching the stars turn over the desert sky and wonder, in the vague, unfocused way that is the closest most men of his type ever get to genuine introspection, whether this was the thing his life was going to be, or whether it was a long approach to something he had not yet arrived at. He passed through Calico Creek on a Wednesday morning, when the town was opening itself to the day in the unhurried way of small places. A man sweeping the boardwalk in front of the general store, a team of mules standing patient in front of the feed merchant, the smell of coffee and frying bacon drifting from the cookhouse attached to the saloon. He went straight through, as he always did, and was back on the open road within minutes, the mesa walls rising on either side and the sky pressing down blue and enormous above him. He thought nothing of it. He thought nothing of it for the next 12 months, through a hot summer of breaking horses on a ranch outside of Las Cruces, through an autumn of cattle driving up into Colorado, through a winter spent in a bunkhouse in Raton with 6 other men, and a wood stove that either burned too hot or not at all. He worked and he slept and he ate and he rode, and the circuit of his life carried him around and around the same territory like a man tracing the rim of a wheel, always moving, never arriving. And then it was spring again, 1881, and Owen Garrison was riding south on the same familiar road, Delegate moving beneath him with the easy confidence of a horse that knows the route. The New Mexico sky stretched overhead in its usual extravagant display of blue, the junipers throwing their scraggly shadows across the road, and ahead of him, close enough now that he could make out the individual buildings, was Calico Creek. He had no intention of stopping. He never had any intention of stopping. But then a sound cut across the morning air, a sharp, jagged sound, not quite a scream and not quite a shout, but something in between, the kind of sound that a person makes when they are caught between pain and panic, and do not have time to choose one or the other. It came from the right side of the road just ahead, from the gap between the feed merchant and a smaller building that might have been a tack shop or a cooperage. Owen pulled Delegate up without thinking. The stallion stopped with a snort and stamped one foot, and Owen sat very still in the saddle for a moment, listening. The sound came again, lower this time, more controlled, not a scream but a determined, strained sound, like someone lifting something too heavy for them. He turned Delegate off the road and into the gap between the buildings. What he found there was a wagon with a broken rear wheel, listing badly to one side, and a woman standing behind it with her shoulder pressed against the wagon bed, trying with everything she had to keep the whole assembly from falling while simultaneously trying to use her free hand to wedge a stone under the axle as a temporary brace. She had the stone in her hand, and she was working with focused, furious precision, but the wagon was winning. The load inside crates of dry goods, he could see, flour and sugar and lamp oil from the labels, was shifting with every degree of tilt, threatening to cascade off the back and take the woman with it. Owen was off Delegate and moving before he had formulated a conscious decision to do anything of the sort. "Hold on," he said, and got his shoulder under the wagon bed on the opposite side from her, taking the weight with both arms, and the listing stopped. The woman, she was somewhere in her mid-20s, he registered, with dark hair coming loose from its pins and a smear of axle grease across her left cheekbone, looked at him across the wagon bed with an expression that moved through surprise and relief and landed somewhere in the vicinity of measured gratitude. "The stone," she said. "Can you hold it while I place the stone?" "I have it," Owen said. "Go ahead." She wedged the stone under the axle with a practiced, definitive motion, and then tested it with 2 sharp pushes with her heel. The wagon held. She straightened up, pushed a strand of dark hair away from her face, and looked at him directly with gray-green eyes that were both sharp and, Owen noticed, very tired. "Thank you," she said. "I was managing." "You nearly had it," he agreed, because she had been. "The wheel spoke cracked," she said, already moving to examine the damage with the matter-of-fact manner of someone who is accustomed to assessing problems and then solving them. "I have a replacement in the shop. I just need to get the load off the wagon first so I can lift it properly." She looked at the crates. "I was going to do that part last." "I can help with the crates," Owen said. She looked at him then with the particular look that a woman alone in a Western Territory town learns to give to unknown men, assessing, direct, not unfriendly but not unwary either. "I do not know you," she said. "Owen Garrison," he said. "I was riding through." "Etta Beckett," she said. "I own this shop." She looked at the crates again and then back at him, and some interior calculation resolved itself. "All right, the crates go inside. I will show you where." He spent the next hour helping Etta Beckett unload her wagon, carry the crates into her general store. It was the general store, he realized, not the tack shop. The building simply backed onto the alley where the wagon had broken down, and then go back out and change the wheel. She had the replacement spoke already cut, had a tolerance for tools and hardware that suggested she had done this kind of work before, and she did not make conversation for the sake of making it. When she spoke, it was to direct or to explain or to answer a question he had asked, and when there was nothing that needed saying, she was quiet, which Owen found, to his own mild surprise, to be a considerable relief from the ordinary run of human company. When the wheel was back on and the crates were restacked and the wagon was sound again, Etta stood back and looked at the work with the same assessing expression she had applied to everything else, and when she was satisfied, she turned to Owen and said, "Come inside. I will get you coffee and something to eat. It is the least I can do." The inside of Etta Beckett's general store was organized with the kind of careful intelligence that reveals a person's inner life more clearly than almost anything they could say about themselves. The shelves were ordered not just by category, but by frequency of use, the things that people needed most within easiest reach. There was a small wood stove in one corner with 2 chairs beside it that suggested the store served as something of a gathering place, and a counter along the back wall behind which Etta moved with the ease of long habit, producing coffee from a pot that was already hot and cutting 2 pieces from a loaf of bread that sat wrapped in cloth on the shelf behind her. "Sit," she said, nodding at one of the chairs by the stove. Owen sat, and when she brought him the coffee and the bread, she took the other chair, which struck him as interesting, not the chair behind the counter, not a standing position, but the equal chair, the position of a person who intends to be in conversation rather than to perform hospitality. "You said you were riding through," she said. "Yes," he said. "Where are you headed?" "South. I have a job offer from a ranching outfit down near Mesilla." She considered this. "You are a cowhand, horse breaker mostly, some trail work," she nodded. "How long have you been on the road?" "7 years, give or take," he said. "Since I was 17. She looked at him steadily. "A long time to be moving." "It is," he said, and he heard in his own voice something that surprised him, not the flat acceptance that had characterized all previous times he had said something similar, but the first trace of something that might have been the beginning of a question about it. She seemed to hear that too, or something like it, because she looked at him with a slight tilt of her head before she said, "Where are you from, originally?" "Tennessee," he said. "East Tennessee. My father had a farm. It did not survive the war well." He paused. "I came west after because there was not much left to stay for." "I am sorry," she said, and the way she said it was neither performative nor dismissive. It was simply honest, the way a person responds to a real thing rather than a conversational placeholder. "You," he asked, "you grew up here?" "I grew up in Albuquerque," she said. "My father was a merchant. He opened this store in Calico Creek in 1875 and ran it until he died in 1878. I came out to settle his estate and found I did not want to leave." She paused, turning her coffee cup between her palms. "My father built something here. I wanted to continue it. And you have been running the store yourself for 3 years. 3 years, she confirmed. "There are people who find that irregular." "Irregular," Owen repeated, and he could not entirely keep the wry quality out of his voice, because that was a notably diplomatic word for what he imagined some of the commentary in a small territory town must look like. Etta smiled at that, a small, quick smile that appeared and disappeared like something glimpsed through a window. "You have spent time in small towns." "Enough," he said. They talked for another half hour, which was longer than Owen Garrison had sat still and talked to anyone in recent memory. At some point during that time, he became aware of a peculiar and unfamiliar sensation that he was having difficulty naming. It was not excitement exactly, and not comfort exactly, and not the ordinary vague interest a man takes in an attractive woman, though Etta Beckett was certainly that. It was something more particular. It was the sensation of paying very close attention to a person, because everything they said was genuinely interesting to him, because the way her mind worked was something he wanted to understand better, because the silences between her sentences were as rich with implication as the sentences themselves. When he finally stood to leave, because the morning was getting away from him and there was road to cover, he stood a moment longer than was strictly necessary, his hat in his hand, and she stood on the other side of the counter with that level gray-green gaze on him. "The Mesilla job," she said. "When does it start?" "They want a man by the end of April," he said. "I have time." There was a beat of silence that seemed to ask a question neither of them had the vocabulary for yet. "There is a hotel above the saloon," she said at last, her voice perfectly even, "if you needed to rest before continuing south." "I might stay a day," Owen said. "The wagon ate most of my morning." "The wheel cracked very conveniently," she said, and there was the smile again, small and quick and entirely genuine. He took the room above the saloon. He did not leave the next day or the day after that. What happened was this. On the morning after his arrival, Owen came out of the hotel and found himself walking not to the livery where Delegate was stabled, but along the main street of Calico Creek in the early morning light. And the town, which he had passed through 3 times without once truly seeing, resolved itself around him in a way that he had not expected. It was a real town, he found, not a stop on a road but a place where people had made their lives, where the morning opened with the smell of bread from the cookhouse and the sound of the smithy starting up, and the sight of children crossing the street toward the schoolhouse at the far end of the road. There was a sense of ongoing life here that the road never had, the road which was all passage and no arrival, all motion and no rest. He found himself at Etta's door before he had consciously decided to go there. She was behind the counter when he came in, opening the day's supply deliveries, cutting the cord on a crate of tinned goods with a clasp knife she wore on her belt. She looked up when he came through the door, and there was a moment of something recognition perhaps, or something more than recognition, before she went back to the crate. "You stayed," she said. "I have a few days," he said. "Can you use an extra pair of hands?" She looked at him across the crate for a moment, and then she handed him the clasp knife handle first. "Start with that crate. The tinned peaches go on the second shelf on the left, labels facing out." He worked in her store that day and the day after, doing the heavy work and the outdoor work and whatever else needed doing, repairing a section of fence at the back where the wood had rotted, mending the latch on the storeroom door that she had mentioned in passing was stiff. She did not ask him to do these things. She mentioned them in the ordinary course of conversation, and he did them, and she accepted this with neither excessive gratitude nor the particular kind of too brisk independence that suggests discomfort. She accepted it the way she accepted most things, which was with a calm and direct practicality that he was coming to find deeply appealing. They talked, in the spaces between tasks and customers, in a way that was building into something. Not building quickly or dramatically. It was not the sudden, combustive thing that songs and stories made of romance, not the way he had always vaguely imagined such things happening to other people. It was slower and more interesting than that. It was the accumulation of things said and heard, the way her opinion surprised him and occasionally challenged him, the way she laughed not often, but when she did it was a full and real laugh, not a polite one, and it startled something open in his chest every time. By the 4th day, he knew her favorite book was a volume of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poems that her father had given her the year she turned 18, and that she had strong views about the territorial government's water rights policies, and that she had been engaged once, briefly, to a man in Albuquerque who had turned out to be better at proposals than at promises, and that she had come to the conclusion that she did not require a husband in the way that conventional wisdom suggested she should. Which she said not with bitterness, but with the confident clarity of a person who has genuinely thought something through. And yet, Owen said on the evening of the fourth day when they were sitting on the bench outside the store in the cooling air, watching the street empty out for supper time, she turned to look at him. "You said you had come to the conclusion you did not require a husband," he said. "You said it like it was settled." "It is settled," she said. "I meant that you said it with a kind of firmness that sounds like an argument," he said. "Like you were making the case to someone." She was quiet for a moment. "Perhaps to myself," she said at last, and then she turned back to look at the street, and he looked at the street too, and neither of them said anything else for a while, but the silence had a texture to it that was entirely different from what it had been before. On the fifth day he went to the livery and spent an hour with Delegate, brushing him down and checking his shoes with the attention a man gives to his horse when he is thinking about distance and time. The livery owner was a large, good-natured man named Harold Dunn, who had apparently known Etta Beckett for the full 3 years she had been in Calico Creek, and who had opinions about her that he shared with the cheerful indiscretion of a man who trusts everyone he likes. "Finest woman in the valley," Harold said, not looking up from the harness he was mending. "Ran that store straight through the drought year of '79 when half the valley was thinking about packing up. Gave credit to families who could not pay, kept the prices fair when the rail supply came back and she could have raised them. People here think the world of her." Owen kept brushing Delegate and said nothing, but he listened with the particular attention of a man filing something away. "You a friend of hers?" Harold asked. "I helped her with her wagon," Owen said. "I have been helping around the store." "She lets you?" Harold looked up then with an expression that managed to be both amused and evaluating. "Etta Beckett does not let people help her unless she thinks they are worth something." Owen looked at Delegate's left shoe and said nothing to this either. But later, riding out of the livery into the afternoon sun, he thought about it with a warmth in his chest that he was not entirely sure what to do with. On the 6th day Etta asked him without preamble, while they were taking inventory together, whether he had written to the ranching outfit in Mesilla to tell them he was delayed. "No," he said. "You should," she said. "It is only fair to them." "I know," he said. She looked at him with the direct gray-green gaze. "Owen." He liked the way she said his name. She said it like it was the name of the specific person she was addressing, not just a sound she used to get someone's attention. "I know I should write," he said. "Do you want to?" The question was careful and precisely aimed. "No," he said after a pause, and then immediately, "I am aware that creates a problem." "What kind of problem?" she asked. "The kind where I do not have anything to offer you except the fact that I am good with horses and not useless with fence posts," he said, "and the fact that I would very much like to stay." She was quiet for a long moment, during which the sound of the street came through the front window and a customer opened the door, saw them both standing very still in the middle of the store with their expressions, and retreated again with a hasty apology. Etta watched the door close. Then she said quietly, "I told you I had come to the conclusion I did not require a husband." "Yes," Owen said. "I want you to understand that I said that honestly," she said. "I am not a woman who is simply waiting for someone to come along and change her mind." "I understand," he said, and he did entirely. "I am also not a woman who is incapable of changing her mind when the evidence warrants it," she said, and she turned back to the shelf of inventory and began counting tins again with absolute composure. Owen stood for a moment. Then he went back to counting tins as well, and neither of them said anything more about it. And yet everything was entirely different. He wrote to the ranching outfit in Mesilla that evening, thanking them for their offer and declining it due to a change in his circumstances. He folded the letter, sealed it, addressed it, and walked to the post office feeling the particular sensation of a man who has just closed a door behind him in full knowledge that it is not the kind of door that opens again, and finding, to his considerable surprise, that the sensation was not frightening at all. It was, if anything, the first real relief he had felt in 7 years. He talked to Harold Dunn about boarding Delegate on a longer-term arrangement, and to the saloon owner about the price of the room on a monthly basis. He sent a longer letter to his nearest cousin back in Tennessee, a woman named Adeline who had periodically sent him letters to general delivery at various post offices across the territory, telling her that he had stopped in Calico Creek and intended to stay a while. He walked back to Etta's store on a warm spring evening and told her that he had declined the Mesilla job. She was at the stove in the back room that served as her kitchen and living quarters, stirring something that smelled of onions and herbs, and she turned when he spoke and looked at him for a long moment with the particular quality of attention she gave to things she was thinking carefully about. "What will you do for work?" she said. "There are ranches in the valley," he said. "Harold mentioned one, the Redmond spread, that needs someone for horse work." "The Redmond Ranch," she said. "Gideon Redmond is a fair employer." Harold said the same, Owen said. She stirred her pot. He stood in the doorway between the store and the kitchen, his hat in his hands. "Stay for supper," she said. It was not a question, and it was not exactly an invitation. It was the kind of natural, matter-of-fact offering that exists between people who have moved past the stage where hospitality needs to be framed as a formal gesture, and it was the most hopeful thing Owen Garrison had heard in a long time. He stayed for supper. He rode out to the Redmond Ranch the next morning and talked to Gideon Redmond, who was a plain-spoken man in his 50s with a white mustache, and the kind of direct assessment in his eyes that Owen recognized as the look of a man who had been hiring cowhands for long enough to know the difference between a man who would stay and a man who would go. Gideon offered him a wage and a bunk in the ranch hand's quarters, and Owen accepted, and rode back to Calico Creek in the afternoon with a job and a room and the strange, slightly vertigo-inducing sensation of a life that was beginning to have a shape. The weeks that followed had a quality to them that Owen would later struggle to describe to himself or to anyone else, because they were quiet weeks, working weeks, weeks of early mornings and hard physical labor and evenings that were notable primarily for their ordinariness: supper at Etta's kitchen, or at the cookhouse at the ranch, or at the saloon when the hour was late, conversations that ranged from the practical to the philosophical. Evenings on the bench outside the store watching the stars come out over the valley ridges, the ease of two people becoming genuinely known to each other in the way that takes time and cannot be hurried. What Owen discovered in those weeks was that Etta Beckett was a person of genuine depth and complexity, not in the romantic novel sense of the word, but in the real sense. She had thought hard about the world she lived in and the injustices it contained, had opinions about the dispossession of the Apache and Navajo peoples from their ancestral lands that were, for 1881 in the New Mexico Territory, strikingly thoughtful. She had employed, for a time, a Navajo woman named Soaring Hawk who had come into town looking for work, and she had paid her a fair wage and treated her with straightforward dignity. And when a handful of townspeople had found this objectionable, Etta had dealt with their objections with a combination of patience and backbone that left no ambiguity about where she stood. Soaring Hawk had eventually moved on, following her family to a different settlement, but Etta had kept a letter she had sent from the road, and she showed it to Owen one evening with a particular quiet pride. "She is doing well," Etta said. "She found work at a trading post near Gallup. Her son is healthy." Owen read the letter carefully and handed it back. "You are not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" she asked. "I am not sure," he said honestly. "Something smaller." She looked at him with an expression that was part amusement and part something more serious. "Women are often more than expected," she said. "People do not always look." "I know," he said. "I am looking now." The quiet thing that had been building between them shifted at that, like a river changing its course. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but with the inevitable and irreversible quality of something that has found its true direction and will not go back. He was sitting on the bench beside her in the evening air, their shoulders close enough that the warmth between them was palpable, and she turned to look at him and he looked back at her, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. Then she said, very quietly, Owen. And he said, Etta, and there was everything in the way they said each other's names. He reached out and took her hand, and she let him, and they sat like that in the cooling evening with the stars coming out one by one over the valley and the sounds of Calico Creek settling around them for the night. And Owen Garrison felt, with a certainty that he had never felt about anything in his rootless and traveling life, that this was the place and the person he had been riding toward for 7 years without knowing it. He kissed her that evening, standing at the door of the store when she was going in for the night, not a long kiss, not an urgent one, but a deliberate and honest one, and she kissed him back with the same quality of deliberateness and honesty, and then she drew back and looked at him with those gray-green eyes in the lamplight from inside the store. You should have stopped the first time, she said, and there was a smile in it. I did not know what I was riding past, he said. No, she agreed. You did not. He rode back to the ranch that night with Delegate moving easy beneath him under a full moon. The valley spread out silver and black around him, and he thought about 3 years of passing through a town that held what he had been looking for, 3 years of moving too fast and looking too far ahead. And he thought that sometimes the thing you are looking for is not on the road in front of you, but in the place you keep treating as a road, as something to be crossed and left behind. He had stopped this time because of a sound, because of a woman with a broken wagon wheel and a stone in her hand, because of something small and ordinary and specific that had cut through the habit of his motion and made him pull his horse over. He was not sorry it had taken 4 years. He was only glad he had not made it 5. The weeks continued to accumulate in the way of real time, which is to say without fanfare, and Owen worked at the Redmond Ranch through the late spring and into the summer, good honest work that used his body and left his mind with space in it. And in the evenings and on Sundays, he was in Calico Creek with Etta, and what had begun as the careful, watchful thing of 2 self-sufficient people letting each other in became something richer and more comfortable and more joyful as the months went on. He met the people of Calico Creek properly now, since he was no longer passing through but staying, and they were the people of any small western town, some generous and some narrow, some curious and some indifferent, some who accepted him easily and some who watched him for a while before deciding. The minister, a thin man named Reverend Alcott who took his sermons very seriously and his coffee even more so, invited him to Sunday services in the building that also served as the schoolroom during the week, and Owen went, somewhat to his own surprise, and found that he did not mind it. He met the Garrett family, who ran the saloon and hotel, a husband and wife named Thomas and Clara, who had 3 children ranging from 8 to 13, and who ran their establishment with cheerful efficiency. He met the doctor, a young man named Eli Marsh who had come out from St. Louis 2 years earlier, and had decided to stay for much the same indeterminate reasons that Owen had something about the territory, and its people had gotten into him and would not let him go. He met Harold Dunn's wife, a brisk and practical woman named Margaret who ran the town's only seamstress operation out of the back of the livery, and who had the ability to know everything about everyone in Calico Creek, while somehow making this feel like warmth rather than intrusion. He met these people and others, and they became the texture of his days, the ordinary fabric of a life that was building itself around him with the confident momentum of something that intends to be permanent. The summer passed. One evening in August, sitting on the floor of Etta's kitchen after supper with a map spread out between them, she had asked him to help plan the route for a supply run she needed to make to the nearest large distribution depot, a 2-day ride. Owen looked up from the map and found her looking at him rather than at the route. "What is it?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "I was just thinking." "About the route." "About you," she said plainly. He waited. "I think about how you might have kept riding," she said. "The 4th time, you had done it 3 times, you had no particular reason to stop." "There was a sound," he said. "A sound," she repeated. "You," he said. "The sound you made when you were trying to hold the wagon." She looked at him with that level gaze. "So it was a stuck wagon wheel that changed everything." "It was you holding a stone and refusing to give up," he said. The wagon was incidental. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, very quietly, "I am glad the wheel broke." He reached across the map and took her hand. "I am glad I stopped." They sat like that for a moment, and then she said, in a different tone, practical, clear, "The Etta who managed things. The route goes through the canyon pass or around by the river. The canyon is faster by half a day, but the road is rougher for the wagon." "Canyon," he said. "We can take it easy on the grade." She looked at the map. "You would come with me." "If you will have me," he said. "You just said the canyon," she said, "so I suppose you had already decided." He smiled. "I suppose I had." The supply run took 3 days, and it was the first extended time they had spent alone together. And it was nothing dramatic: camp coffee in the mornings, the rhythm of the road and the loaded wagon, conversations that wandered from practical to philosophical and back again, evenings by the fire where the desert cooled fast after sunset and the stars pressed down very close, and the silence was the deep, inhabited kind of silence that is found only in open country away from other people. On the second evening, sitting by the fire with the canyon walls around them and the sky above making its usual vast argument for beauty, Owen told her about his father and the farm in Tennessee and the war years, things he had not talked about to anyone in a long time. He told her about riding west at 17 with $11 and a horse borrowed from a neighbor who trusted him to pay it back eventually, which he had, at the end of his first cattle season. He told her about the years of moving, and the way the moving had felt first like freedom, and then like habit, and then like something he was not sure he knew how to stop. She listened with the quality of attention she brought to everything important, full, focused, not filling the spaces with reassurance but letting him say what he needed to say and then sitting with it. "Are you glad you stopped moving?" she asked when he had been quiet for a while. "More than I can say," he said. She looked into the fire. "I was lonely," she said after a moment. "I want to tell you that because I have spent a long time not saying it. Running the store, being useful, keeping my father's work alive, those things are real and they matter, but I was lonely." "Not anymore," he said. She looked at him across the fire. "Not anymore," she agreed. In September, Gideon Redmond offered Owen a more permanent position, not just a ranch hand but something between a foreman and a horse manager, overseeing the breaking and training of Redmond's horse stock and managing the stable operation. It came with better wages and a small cabin on the property rather than the bunkhouse. Owen accepted it and spent 3 evenings that week cleaning and airing out the cabin, which had been used for storage and was full of old saddle equipment and broken furniture. And when it was livable, he had the thought that it was not yet a home, but that it was a place where a home could begin. He asked Etta to ride out to see the cabin on a Sunday morning, telling her he wanted her opinion on it. She rode out on a small gray mare named Pearl that she kept stabled at Harold's livery, and she walked through the cabin with the same assessing intelligence she brought to her store, noting the light and the space and the solid construction of the walls. "It is a good cabin," she said. "It just needs some things in it." "I know," Owen said. "I am working on that." She looked at him. He looked back at her. "Etta," he said, "I want to ask you something." "I know," she said, with the particular serenity of a woman who has thought the situation through and arrived at a conclusion, and is simply waiting for the conversation to catch up. He had thought about how to say this. He had thought about it for weeks, turning the words over, trying to find the ones that were honest rather than just the ones that sounded well. He was not a man given to elaborate speech, and he did not want to try to be something he was not in the most important conversation of his life. "I rode past this town 3 times, he said. 3 years running, and I never stopped, and I did not know what that meant. I did not know I was missing something specific. I just thought I was moving. And then the 4th year something made me pull my horse over, and it was you, and I would like to spend the rest of my life grateful for that. I would like to spend the rest of my life with you. I am not a man of great means. I have a horse and a job in this cabin, and I have the intention of building something here that is worth having. I am asking you to build it with me." She looked at him in the light that came through the cabin window, the September light of New Mexico in the morning that is gold and clear and makes everything look like it has been lit from inside. "I told you I had come to the conclusion that I did not require a husband," she said. "You did," he said. "I have revised that conclusion," she said. "Specifically, I do not require a husband, but I would very much like to have you." He crossed the small space of the cabin in 2 steps and she met him halfway, and when he kissed her this time, it was not the careful, deliberate kiss at the door of the store. It was longer and warmer and full of the accumulated weight of all the months and all the conversations and all the evenings on the bench and all the things they had told each other by the fire in the canyon. And when they stepped back from each other, she was laughing. Not her small, quick smile, but the full, real laugh. And he was smiling in the way he had not smiled since he was a boy on his father's farm before everything changed. They were married in November of 1881, on a cold, clear day with the valley floor covered in the first thin frost of the season, and the mountains visible in every direction, their peaks already carrying snow. Reverend Alcott performed the ceremony in the church schoolhouse with the whole town apparently in attendance, or at least it seemed that way to Owen, who had not previously been at the center of a social gathering of any kind, and found it both overwhelming and deeply moving in a way he had not anticipated. Etta wore a dress the color of winter sage, made by Margaret Dunn, who had been quietly planning it for weeks, and she carried a small bunch of dried flowers from the summer garden she kept behind the store. Owen wore his good coat, the one that had spent most of its time folded in his saddlebag, and a shirt that Clara Garrett had pressed for him that morning and handed over with the brisk affection of a woman who has decided to claim someone as family and does not require their permission for it. Harold Dunn cried, which surprised nobody who knew Harold. Gideon Redmond stood up on Owen's behalf with the solemnity of a man taking this role very seriously, and the schoolteacher, a composed young woman named Frances Webb, who had been Etta's closest friend in Calico Creek for the past year, stood on Etta's side. When Reverend Alcott asked if anyone present had cause to object and nobody said anything, Owen heard in the silence 3 years of passing through without stopping, and he thought, "I was coming here the whole time. I just did not know it." They said their vows in the particular plain, serious way of people who mean every word. After the ceremony, there was a gathering at the saloon, with food that half the town had contributed to and music from a fiddle player named Santiago Cruz, who could make his instrument sound like a whole dance hall orchestra when he wanted to. And Owen Garrison danced with his wife under the low ceiling of the Calico Creek saloon, with the people who had become his neighbors around them, and the fiddle filling the cold November air with something that felt very much like joy. They lived that first winter in the cabin on the Redmond property, commuting the short distance into town each morning so that Etta could open her store. Owen had worried briefly about what it would mean for the store, whether Etta would want to step back from it, whether the practicalities of a shared life would require her to give something up that she had built and valued. He had, in fact, raised this concern directly, because the alternative was to make assumptions, and assumptions had a way of causing damage. "I am keeping the store," she said, without any drama, as though this were the most obvious thing in the world. "I know," he said. "I want to make sure you know that I know." She looked at him with her level gaze, and then she reached up and put her hand on his jaw, which she did occasionally and which always did something to his ability to think clearly, and she said, "You are a very good man, Owen Garrison." He put his hand over hers. "I'm trying to be," he said. "You are not trying," she said. "You simply are." The winter was cold but not brutal, the valley sheltered by its ridges, the cabin warm enough with the stove going and good wood stacked against the outside wall. They learned the rhythms of each other's company in the closest and most ordinary sense. The way she was awake before him in the mornings, already dressed and making coffee before he had opened his eyes, and the way he was the one who banked the stove at night after she had fallen asleep with her book on her chest. The way she dealt with problems by thinking them through alone first, needing silence before she could talk, and the way he dealt with problems by moving, by finding something physical to do while the problem worked itself out in his head. The way she hummed when she was concentrated on something, and the way he took on a very particular expression of focused stillness when he was listening hard, which she pointed out to him one evening, and he had not previously known about himself. They fought, occasionally, not often, because they were both constitutionally disinclined to drama, but occasionally with the authentic friction of two strong-willed people sharing a life. The first real argument was in January about money, specifically about a loan that Etta had been considering, a larger credit line from the Territorial Bank to expand the store's stock ahead of the anticipated railroad connection, which was apparently being planned again in earnest. Owen had concerns about the terms. Etta had different concerns. The conversation escalated into something that had heat in it, real heat, the kind that comes from two people who care about the same thing but have genuinely different views. They went to bed without resolving it, which was uncomfortable, and Owen lay awake in the dark listening to her breathing beside him and thinking about the conversation, not the fighting part of it but the substance of it, what she had actually said about the opportunity and the risk. In the morning he told her she was right about the opportunity, and that his concerns about the terms could be addressed by negotiating the specific clauses she had already. He now understood, planned to negotiate. She listened to this, and then she told him that his concern about the overall debt load had made her think more carefully about the phasing of the expansion, and that she had revised the plan accordingly. They looked at each other over the breakfast coffee, and there was something between them that was not quite laughter but was adjacent to it, the particular human comedy of two stubborn people discovering that they are, in fact, better together than apart. "You revised your plan," he said. "You revised your position," she said. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said, and that was that. The railroad came to Calico Creek in the spring of 1882. Not the full main line, but the siding finally connected to the network, which was enough to transform the economics of the valley in ways both immediate and gradual. Etta's timing with the store expansion had been exactly right, and the additional stock that the credit line had allowed her to carry was there and waiting when the first freight connection brought new supply options. Owen watched her in those months with a pride that he did not always know what to do with, because it was so large and so specific, pride not in a vague sense, but in the detailed, particular sense of a person who has watched someone work and knows precisely what the work has cost and what it has produced. He told her this one evening in April, sitting on the bench outside the store in the twilight with the valley going soft and purple around them, and she turned to look at him with an expression he had not seen from her before, something open and slightly unguarded, something that he recognized as her being genuinely moved. "Thank you," she said, quietly. "It is the truth," he said. "I know," she said. "That is why it means something." By the summer of 1882, Owen had been named the full foreman at the Redmond Ranch, and Gideon, who had no children of his own and was beginning to think about the future of the operation, had begun talking to him about a longer arrangement, a possible partnership stake that would vest over years of continued work. Owen brought this to Etta with all the details, and she went through the terms with the careful intelligence she brought to financial matters and told him it was a fair arrangement with one exception, which she identified precisely, and he went back to Gideon and negotiated the exception, and Gideon agreed to it and said, with a smile under his white mustache, that Owen's wife was smarter than the both of them. "She is," Owen said. "That is a good thing," Gideon said. "A man who knows that is a man who will make good decisions." In September of 1882, Etta told Owen that she was expecting a child. She told him in the kitchen of the cabin early in the morning with the same directness she brought to everything, and he stood very still for a moment, and then he crossed the kitchen and put his arms around her and held her for a long time without saying anything, because there was nothing that words could add to what he felt. "Owen," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Yes," he said, "you are not saying anything. "I am not," he agreed. "Because I would like to stay in this moment for a little while before we have to talk about anything practical." She laughed against his shoulder, the full real laugh, and held on to him. And outside the window the New Mexico morning was doing its usual extravagant thing with the light. Their son was born in the spring of 1883, on a day in April when the valley was coming back to green, and the ridges were sharp and clear against the sky after a week of rain. Eli Marsh, the doctor, was there, and Margaret Dunn, who had considerable experience in this area and whose presence Etta had specifically requested. And Owen was there too, because Etta had told him simply that she wanted him there, and he had been there, holding her hand through the difficult hours with the steady, unwavering presence that was one of the things she had loved about him first. The boy was healthy and large, and had, when he arrived, an expression of concentrated indignation that made Eli Marsh laugh and Margaret Dunn say approvingly that he had the Beckett look, which she meant as a compliment of the highest order. They named him James Thomas Garrison, James for Owen's father and Thomas for Thomas Garrett, who had been the first person in Calico Creek to shake Owen's hand and mean it. Owen held his son for the first time sitting in the chair by the bedroom window while Etta slept, exhausted and peaceful, in the bed behind him, and the boy in his arms was warm and incomprehensibly small and alive with a vitality that seemed, to Owen, like something close to a miracle. He sat there in the spring afternoon light and thought about roads, and about 3 years of passing through without stopping, and about the 4th year when something made him pull his horse over, and he thought that the chain of accidents and decisions and sounds and stones that had led here, to this valley, this woman, this child, this life, was something that could not have been planned or engineered or arrived at by intention. It could only be arrived at by stopping, by being present in a specific place at a specific time, by paying attention to a sound in an alley that had nothing to do with him. Etta woke in the late afternoon and found him still sitting by the window with James, and she watched them both from the bed with an expression that was, Owen would later say, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life, and he had seen the canyon country of New Mexico in the morning light and the plains of Colorado in the summer, and he held that statement by comparison, and it remained true. "How is he?" she said. "Sleeping," Owen said. "He was not happy about it, but he is sleeping." "That is very much his personality already," she said. Owen looked at James and then at Etta. "Are you all right?" "I am better than all right," she said, and she meant it. He could hear that she meant it completely. He brought James to her, and she took him with the careful confidence of a woman who had, it turned out, spent considerable time with her younger cousins in Albuquerque, and was less unfamiliar with infants than Owen, who had very little experience with anything smaller than a foal. She looked down at James with a focused tenderness that added another dimension to the person he had been coming to know for 2 years, and she said, quietly, so as not to wake the baby, "James Thomas." "James Thomas," Owen agreed. "James Thomas Garrison," she said, with a satisfaction in the words that sounded like a rival. The years continued, which is the ordinary miracle. They simply continued, accumulating into the weight of a real life shared between real people, and the accumulation was beautiful in its ordinariness and particular in its details. James grew from the indignant infant into a solid, bright-eyed boy with Owen's steadiness and Etta's intelligence, and a laugh that had come from somewhere all his own. He was walking at 10 months and talking in full sentences before he was 2, and by 3, he had discovered that horses were the most important thing in the world, which meant he spent a great deal of time at the Redmond Ranch, where his father could keep an eye on him, and Gideon, who had appointed himself a kind of honorary grandfather, could indulge him in ways that were probably not entirely advisable. The store expanded in 1884, the credit from the bank having been paid back and the revenue from the improved rail access, allowing Etta to add a proper hardware section that she had wanted since the beginning, and she hired a young man named Tomás Reyes as a counter assistant, the the son of a local ranching family, who turned out to be quick and reliable and who stayed on for years. Owen and Gideon finalized the partnership agreement in the same year, Owen taking a 20% stake in the Redmond operation with a clear pathway to a larger share over time. And when they shook hands on it in the ranch office on a winter afternoon, Gideon said, "I always could tell a man who would stay." And Owen thought about that for a long time afterward. They had a second child in 1885, a daughter this time, born in August when the valley was at its hottest, and the cicadas ran all night, and the early morning was the only cool part of the day. They named her Ruth Owen Garrison, Ruth for Etta's mother, Owen for no particular reason except that it sounded, as Etta said, like a woman who would take no nonsense, which seemed like a good thing to aspire to. Ruth had Etta's gray-green eyes from the beginning, which made Owen absurdly happy, and a temperament that was all her own, watchful and particular, interested in everything, not quick to smile. But when she smiled, it was the complete and serious smile of a person who has decided something is genuinely worth smiling about, which it occurred to Owen was very much like her mother. James, at 2.5, inspected his sister with the solemn authority of a person whose position in the family is now altered and who is working out the implications. He eventually concluded after several days of careful observation that she was acceptable. He brought her a smooth stone from the yard as a gift, which Owen and Etta both recognized as an extremely James thing to do, and placed it beside her head with gravity. "A good rock," he told Owen. "A very good rock," Owen agreed. The town around them continued its growth. The railroad siding had attracted 2 new businesses, a second livery operation and a small freight office, and there was talk of a schoolhouse expansion, the current building having become inadequate for the growing number of children in the valley. Etta was on the committee that was planning the expansion, along with Reverend Alcott and Frances Webb, the schoolteacher, and 2 of the local ranchers' wives. She came home from the committee meetings with the particular focused energy of a person who has been having productive arguments. "Alcott wants the new building to face east for the symbolic significance," she reported one evening, with the tone of a woman managing her patients carefully. "Francis and I have explained that the west-facing aspect is better for the afternoon light and the children's eyesight. He will come around." He did come around, as Etta had predicted, the following week, and the schoolhouse was built with a west-facing aspect and large windows, and was completed before the winter of 1886. Gideon Redmond died in the winter of 1887, peacefully and in his own bed at 63 years of age. He had been slowing for the better part of the previous year, and Owen had been carrying more of the ranch's management for some time, and Gideon's death, when it came, was the kind that allowed for preparation, and for the saying of things that needed to be said. Owen sat with him on several of his last evenings, the way a man sits with someone who has been important to him, talking about horses and weather and the valley, the particular conversations that are about everything except what they are about. Gideon left the ranch to Owen in his will, not the 20% that the partnership had grown to by then, but the entirety of it in recognition, the document said in Gideon's own dictated words, of a man who had proved himself to be the kind of rancher and the kind of person that this land deserved. Owen read the will in the lawyer's office in Calico Creek with Etta beside him, and had to sit very still for a moment before he could speak. "He never told you he was thinking of this?" Etta asked. "He said once that he hoped the ranch would go to someone who understood it," Owen said. "I did not take it as I did not think he meant." He stopped because his voice was doing something he needed a moment to address. Etta put her hand over his on the table. They kept the name. The Redmond Ranch had been called that for 15 years, and the name meant something in the valley and to Gideon's memory, and neither Owen nor Etta wanted to change it. It was, Owen said, the kind of name that a place earns, and you do not take that away because ownership has passed. James, at 4, accepted the news that his family now owned a horse ranch with the equanimity of a person, for whom this confirmed what he had always essentially believed, which was that horses were the most important thing, and therefore it made sense that horses should be central to his life's arrangement. The years from 1887 to 1890 were the years of the ranch's consolidation, of Owen learning ownership in the full sense of the word, not just the physical work, which he knew, but the management and the financial stewardship and the relationship with the valley's other ranchers, the network of mutual aid and mutual respect that was the actual infrastructure of a community. He made mistakes, as all people do when they expand into new responsibilities, and he was honest with Etta about them, and she was useful in the way she always was, not softening the analysis but not being harsh about it either, simply being clear-eyed and then helping him find the path forward. The ranch grew. Not enormously, not dramatically, but steadily in the way that good work accumulates. More stock, a better reputation, a relationship with buyers as far as Colorado and Texas, a name that meant something when Owen Garrison's horses came to a sale. James turned 7 in 1890 and began spending full weekdays at the school, which he approached with the systematic attention he brought to everything, coming home with specific questions about geography and arithmetic that turned dinner conversations into educational seminars. Ruth, now 5, followed her brother to school the following year and proceeded within 2 weeks to have strong opinions about how it was run. Her teacher says she is very organized, Etta reported to Owen with the carefully neutral tone of a mother presenting information without editorializing. That sounds like Ruth, Owen said. Her teacher also says that she has been organizing the other children, which the teacher finds both helpful and slightly alarming. Owen looked at his daughter across the supper table. Ruth was currently reorganizing the bread basket. Yes, he said, that sounds like Ruth. They had a third child in 1892, another son, named Henry William Garrison, William for Owen's older brother who had gone east after the war and was now a schoolteacher in Virginia, and with whom Owen had maintained a correspondence that had grown more regular and more honest as the years gave both of them perspective. Henry arrived in June, a summer baby, calm from the beginning in the way that some children simply are, as though they have arrived already settled, and he grew into a gentle, observant boy who would sit for hours watching the things around him with the patient attention of someone taking extensive mental notes. The family occupied the cabin on the ranch now, enlarged twice over the years, added to as needs grew, a proper kitchen and a second bedroom and a proper parlor that had bookshelves along one wall that Etta had filled over the years with an accumulation that testified to both her reading habits and her acquisitions on every supply run that passed a bookseller. The store in town was still hers, still Etta's. She had made this clear at every juncture, and Owen had never suggested otherwise, and the store had grown with the town and was now a significant enterprise, well-stocked and well-regarded and managed with the efficient, fair-handed style that had made it the center of Calico Creek's practical life. They were sitting on the porch of the enlarged cabin on a summer evening in 1893, James 10, and Ruth 8 and Henry 1. The valley spread out before them in the particular gold light of late afternoon, the mountains showing their summer colors in the distance. When Owen said, not in the tone of a major statement, but in the easy conversational tone of something that had been sitting in his mind for a while and had found a quiet moment to emerge. "Do you remember what you said to me that first evening, on the bench outside the store?" Etta looked at him. She was sitting with her bare feet up on the porch railing, which was something she did in the evenings when she was fully at rest, which was one of the things Owen had come to associate with her being completely comfortable. "I have said many things in the evenings on the bench," she said. "You said that I should have stopped the first time," he said. She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the valley. "I did say that," she said. "I have been thinking about that," he said. "Whether you were right." She looked at him. "And I think if I had stopped the first year, I would have been too young and too restless and too much in love with the idea of the road to see anything clearly," he said. "I think the second year I was closer but still not ready. The third year," he paused, thinking. "By the third year I was beginning to understand that I was looking for something, but I did not know what it was yet." He looked at her. "The fourth year I was ready. I just needed something to stop me." She regarded him with those gray-green eyes that he had been looking into for 12 years and that still, regularly, held something that surprised him. "You think the timing was correct," she said. "I think we arrived at each other when we were both ready," he said, "which is the best kind of arriving." She lowered her feet from the railing and turned in her chair to face him more fully. "That is a very philosophical position for a horse rancher," she said. "I have been influenced by someone who thinks carefully about things," he said. She reached over and took his hand, the way she did sometimes, simply and naturally without making anything of it, because it was the kind of gesture that does not need to be made into anything. It simply is what it is. "Owen," she said. "Etta," he said. They sat in the evening light with their hands linked, and the valley opening out before them, and the sounds of their children inside the house, and the horses in the paddock, beyond the fence, and the crickets beginning their evening conversation in the long grass. And it was not a dramatic moment. It was not a moment that would be remarkable to any observer. It was simply a moment of complete and particular happiness, the kind that is made not of single extraordinary things, but of the deep accumulation of ordinary ones. The years and the work and the arguments and the laughter and the children and the early mornings and the late nights and all the thousands of small conversations and shared silences that are what a life actually consists of when you put the story of it down and live inside it. James came to the porch door and said that Henry had gotten into the flour bin again, and Etta stood with the resigned competence of a mother who has dealt with this before, and Owen followed her inside. And the evening went on in all its ordinariness, and it was everything. In the years that followed, the children grew with the unstoppable momentum of all children, James into a serious, skilled young man who had his father's way with horses and his mother's capacity for hard work, and a head for numbers that surprised everyone except Etta, who had noticed it early. Ruth into a person of formidable capability, and the particular brand of organized intelligence that, as Francis Webb once told Etta, made her one of the most impressive young people the schoolhouse had produced, which was high praise from a woman who had taught every child in the valley for 15 years. Henry grew into himself slowly, the way gentle people sometimes do, coming into his full nature like something that has been taking its time and is not hurried. And what emerged was a person of such genuine kindness and curiosity that even James, who was not demonstratively affectionate, would sometimes look at his younger brother with the expression of someone who finds the world slightly better for a specific person being in it. Owen and Etta grew older together in the way that people who have built something real together grow older, not diminished by time but deepened by it. Their knowledge of each other having accumulated to a richness that was different in kind from the beginning, neither better nor worse but different, the way a thing is different when it has had time to become fully itself. The ranch became known through the territory for its horses, not the largest operation, but reliable, well-managed, producing stock that held its value and its quality. And Owen's reputation was the reputation of a man who knew his work and kept his word, which in the world he moved through was a reputation worth more than most kinds of wealth. The store remained the beating heart of Calico Creek's commercial life, and Etta remained its center, not because she was possessive of it, but because she was genuinely good at it and genuinely loved it, loved the relationships it created, the way it put her at the intersection of people's needs and made her useful to them. She had made it more than a store in the years since her father had handed it to her in the form of a legacy and a responsibility. She had made it a place. On a Sunday evening in late autumn of 1895, When James was 12 and Ruth 10 and Henry 3, Owen and Etta sat on the porch of the cabin that had become a proper house through the additions of the years. And the valley was doing what it did in October, going gold and rust, and the particular burnt orange that made the mesa walls look like something out of a painting. And Etta was reading the volume of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poems that her father had given her the year she turned 18. The same copy, worn now at the spine and with pages that had softened with years of handling. And Owen was watching the light change on the mountains and not thinking about anything in particular, except the quality of the moment. He had been thinking, on and off through the day, about something he had never quite put into words, the peculiar mathematics of a life, the way that so many things that seem like accidents or arbitrary turns turn out from the right distance to have been inevitable. He had passed through Calico Creek 3 times without stopping because nothing in him was ready to stop, and then the 4th time something in him had changed, not dramatically, not with announcement, but with the quiet internal shift that is the real kind of change, and he had been ready. And a sound had cut across his motion, and he had pulled his horse over, and the rest was 12 years of accumulated life. "Etta," he said. She looked up from the book. "I have never thanked you," he said, "for being in that alley with a broken wagon wheel." She looked at him with the gray-green eyes that had been his compass for 12 years. "I have never thanked you for stopping," she said. He looked at her, at the woman who had shown him what it meant to belong somewhere, to build something, to stay, and felt the full weight of everything she was to him, not in the breathless way of early love, but in the deeper and more sustaining way of a love that has had time and difficulty and joy, and has come through all of them intact and enlarged. "I would stop 1,000 times," he said, "in every one of the years I rode through if I had known." "You stopped when you were supposed to," she said, which was what she always said, and she was right, which she usually was. She went back to her book. He went back to watching the mountains. The light continued its slow, magnificent change over the valley that had become the center of his world, and the children's voices came from inside the house. And Delegate's successor, a young roan stallion they had named Ambassador, continuing the political theme that Owen had apparently established without realizing it, moved in the paddock with the easy grace of a well-kept horse, and the evening settled around them like something that has no intention of ending. They stayed there until the stars came out, which they always did, Owen and Etta Garrison, on the porch of the house they had built in the valley of Calico Creek, watching the sky do what it had always done over this country, turn and brighten, and lay itself out in the full extravagance of its beauty. And the night was cold and clear and permanent with stars, and the man who had once ridden through this town 3 times without stopping was exactly where he was supposed to be, had been supposed to be all along, was home in the fullest and most complete sense of the word, and would never again in his life mistake moving for living. The years continued to give them what years give to people who have chosen each other fully, difficulty and abundance and loss and laughter, and the particular grace that is available only to those who stay. James, at 17, was already the horseman his father had always seen in him, moving through the work of the ranch with a confidence that was not bravado but competence, the real kind, and he had plans and ambitions that were specific and practicable, and that Owen listened to with the full serious attention of a father who trusts his son's intelligence. By the time James was 18, he was taking on real responsibility for the horse training program, developing his own methods, and Gideon Redmond's old dream of a ranch that would outlast its founder was taking a new and unmistakable shape. Ruth, at 15, had decided with characteristic precision that she intended to read law, a statement she made at the dinner table one evening with the tone of someone announcing something that has been decided and requires no further discussion. Owen and Etta exchanged a look over her head, not a look of doubt, but a look of recognition, of 2 people acknowledging that their daughter was, in fact, exactly who she had always been, and that the world had better be ready for it. "Law," Owen said. "Law," Ruth confirmed, passing the bread basket. There are significant obstacles, Etta said. I am aware, Ruth said. I have already thought about them. Etta looked at Ruth with the level, assessing expression of a woman evaluating a situation clearly, and Owen saw in that look something that was not surprise but its opposite, the deep recognition of one person seeing themselves in another. Then we will figure out the path, Etta said. I know, Ruth said, with the serenity of a person who has never genuinely doubted that her parents would say this. Henry, at 7, was reading everything he could find and had developed an inexplicable passion for the stars. Not the poetic kind of passion, but the specific, questioning kind, wanting to know the names and distances, and what the patterns meant to the different peoples who had looked at them, which led to some of the most interesting conversations Owen had had in years. Sitting on the porch with his youngest child pointing at the sky, and asking questions that Owen could not always answer, and that they would then look up together in the books that lined the parlor wall. In the spring of 1900, Owen rode the Calico Creek Road on Ambassador. The original Ambassador had been replaced by a third-generation roan, also called Ambassador, because Owen had decided this was just the name of his horse now regardless of the individual animal, and came into the town from the north, the direction from which he had always come, the direction from which he had ridden through 3 times without stopping. The town was larger now, genuinely larger. A real school building and a post office with its own dedicated structure, and 2 new streets that had grown out from the original main road, and a doctor's proper clinic that Eli Marsh had finally been able to build after 20 years of working out of his house. The painted sign at the edge of town had been replaced twice since 1881, but there was always a painted sign, and it still said Calico Creek in the same letters, welcoming, ordinary, permanent. He came down the main street and tied Ambassador at the rail in front of the general store, Etta's store, his wife's store, the place where the day's life of Calico Creek still converged, and went inside to the sound of the bell above the door, and the smell of coffee and dry goods, and the particular quality of light that came through the store's large front windows on a spring morning. Tomas Reyes was at the counter, now 30, and the senior employee of a 3-person operation that also included a young woman named Clara Ortiz who had been hired the previous year. James was behind the store in the loading area, supervising the delivery of a supply order, and talking to the delivery man with the easy authority of a young man entirely at home in the work. Etta was at the back of the store going through the books, and she looked up when the bell sounded, and the expression on her face when she saw him was the same expression it had always been, the same since the first time he had come into this store and she had handed him a cup of coffee and sat in the equal chair open, direct, particular, entirely and specifically for him. "Owen," she said. "Etta," he said. He crossed the store and she stood from her stool, and he kissed her as he always did when he came through the door, not as a performance and not as a habit, but as the simple and genuine expression of a man greeting the person he loves best in the world. She put her hands on his chest and looked up at him with gray-green eyes that had not changed in 19 years, except that they had, the way all things change that have had time and life in them. They were deeper now and warmer and full of the specific knowledge that comes only from years of knowing one person well. "How was the ride?" she said. "Good," he said. "Ambassador is feeling strong. There is some new green coming up on the North Ridge. Henry asked me this morning if the stars in spring are the same stars as winter or different ones," she said. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to ask his father," she said, with a small, quick smile. "Thank you for that," he said. She laughed, and he held her, and outside the window the spring of 1900 was doing what the spring of 1881 had done, which was opening the valley in all its extravagant color, the juniper hillsides and the red mesa walls and the enormous New Mexico sky pressing down blue and permanent over a town that had been the life they had built together, and would go on being that life. and would hold within it everything that had come from one man pulling his horse over on a spring morning because a sound cut through his motion, and for the first time in years he stopped. He had stopped because of her. He stayed because of everything. And the stopping, and the staying, and the everything, all of it was right here, in this store, in this valley, in the woman in his arms who had been waiting for him without waiting, who had built her life without needing him to complete it, and who had let him in anyway, and whose love was the best thing that had ever found him on any road. Owen Garrison had ridden into Calico Creek 3 years running without stopping. The 4th year, something made him pull his horse over. He was grateful every day of his life that he did.